Let's try something a little bit different today. Now, usually every colour pencil drawing that I make, I pretty much only use a white Bristol board. I haven't really ever drawn on coloured paper. So let's have a little experiment and see if it's possible to create specifically a realistic drawing on coloured paper. Now, I've been researching for this to try and find what the best paper will be to use. And generally speaking, I see a lot of people recommending Canson Colorline paper. Now, this is actually very tricky to get hold of in the UK, but I have managed to get some ordered in. It does seem to come in loads of different colours. I've picked this kind of orangey, pinky, yellow set. And I have to say, at first look, it feels quite thin. It's quite different to what I'm used to drawing on. So I think the best thing to do, rather than just getting straight into drawing a picture, let's do some little swatches, and I want to see how the pencil goes down on the paper, and particularly how vibrant the pencil looks on the paper. So I'm just going to pick a few colours. I'm going to use my Prismacolor set for this. Let's start off by testing out the white pencil. And I just want to make a little swatch going from nice and light to as dark as I can go with this pencil, or as much pencil down on the paper as I can put. And then let's do the same for the primary colours, and also let's do a green. And actually it is looking better than I expected. I think because particularly Prismacolor, it's quite a waxy pencil. It means that it's not too translucent. It's not really showing through a huge amount of the paper, and that is so important if I'm going to be able to build up a realistic drawing with these pencils. Now, out of interest, I also just want to make some swatches with my polychromos pencils as well. Generally speaking, I think of polychromos as a little bit more transparent than the Prismacolor, and you can see particularly with the white, I don't think it's as good as the Prismacolor. It is still showing up as quite a nice bright white, but not to the same degree. And some of the other colours I think look pretty similar. The red and the yellow with the polychromos looks pretty similar to the Prismacolor, but the blue and the green look much more muted. So I'm not sure. I think it's going to work better with the Prismacolor pencils than with polychromos. That said, I do think it would still work with polychromos, just maybe not as well. So I think that's all the testing that I want to do for now. I think the best thing to do is to just get stuck in and draw something. Now, in terms of what I want to draw, I think it's going to be the best sort of experiment if I try and pick something quite vibrant. But I also want to have a really crisp line around the edge so that it really stands out where the pencil is versus the background, the paper. So I'm going to draw this bowl of fruit. It has a really good variety of different colours. All of the different fruits are making up different colours, and there's a lot of very light areas, which I do think is going to be interesting. Now, before we get started with the drawing, if you want to draw this with me in a lot more detail, it is available on my Patreon. I have not only this drawing, but loads of different drawings in a variety of subject matters. And I have tutorials on not only coloured pencils, but also graphite pencils and watercolour pencils. Every tutorial includes really in-depth instructions, all of the real-time footage, details of all of the colours I'll be using, sketch outlines, and the reference photo. I have a mixture of some reasonably quick drawings, and also some much larger, more complicated drawings, which do tend to have a bit more wow factor. Check out the link in the description. Now, I do want to start this in a similar way to how I would usually. I want to start with the lightest colours and gradually work my way towards the darker colours. But usually I'm drawing on white paper, so the lightest colour, white, is pretty much already done for me. But here I need to add those white areas in. So I want to be looking at the reference photo and putting white down anywhere that is particularly bright. So I got some areas that are a really bright standout white, some areas that are just quite light but maybe not bright white, but I think if I don't put the white down, then it's going to end up looking really odd and muted at the end. So I'm not only starting with the white pencil, which I wouldn't usually do, but I also would say that I am pressing a little bit firmer than I normally would. I want the patches that will be white to really be nice and bright, so I do need to put down more pencil than I otherwise would. That said, I am definitely not pressing full force. I do need to be able to get a lot more colours down here. Now, it looks a little bit random at the moment. It looks like I'm just putting random white spots on the paper, but this does all correlate with what I can see on the reference photo and where all of those lightest areas are. So now, right now, I do want to go about this in a similar way to to how I would normally. As I say, I want to be starting with the lightest colours and gradually working my way towards the darker colours. So now that we've built up the white pencil, I want to be really looking at my reference photo and thinking about what the next darkest colour is. And actually, it's not dissimilar to the white. This is a very, very light yellow. I want to be building up this colour anywhere where I can see a hint of it. So for example, here I'm drawing a little patch of, I think it's melon. I don't want the whole thing to be white. I think that would be too much. And there are some areas on the melon which need to be a very bright white. What I can do is use this yellow to still be adding in the light colours, but maybe not quite as bright. And I'm really liking how much these light areas are standing out on this quite dark paper, really. It feels quite an interesting way to draw just because it's so different to what I would normally be seeing at this point. So I still want to be moving down through the colours, and now I want to move on to the next lightest colour I can see. So this is quite a bright yellow. There is quite a lot of mango within the picture, so I want to put down a nice base layer that I can build upon. Again, I would say that I'm pressing quite a lot firmer than I would usually. Because this is a coloured paper, I'm just needing to put down so much more of the pencil so that I have a block of that colour in. It really doesn't take a lot on my normal Bristol board to build up quite a vibrant colour, but it takes a lot more on this paper, which is fine. It's just something that needs adjusting. And then I just want to work through. I'm really thinking of one fruit at a time and filling in the lightest colour in each of those fruits. So I can fill in quite light green now for what will be the kiwi, and then I can fill in a really quite light pink for the raspberries. The raspberries have quite a lot of texture on them, but I don't need to worry about adding that in at this point. That's something I can add in later when I'm building up all of the texture. For now, I think it's important to just get something down, something that isn't bright orange on all areas of the drawing. So let's move on to blocking in some blue for the blueberries, and particularly with the blue, you can see how much of the orange is still showing through. I would say I'm putting down a goodly amount of the pencil, but I'd have to put down so much for this orange to not show through. And really, I don't want to be doing that until much closer to the end of the drawing. So once I'm happy with all of the colours that I've built up for now, what I want to do is go back over some of these colours and brighten them up with the white. So something that I am particularly noticing is that the colours are going down on the paper a lot darker than maybe I expect, just because that blue, for example, here is mixing with that orange. I think it's just making it look so much darker, but that's okay. I can use this white to go back over the top of the blue to brighten and lighten it up. You can see what a massive difference this is making. So I want to go over all of the blueberries. They're the main area that have some really prominent light patches on them. And then on the raspberries, rather than adding white over the top and making some of the really light patches lighter, I'm actually going to use quite a bright red to tone down some of the darker areas. So just blocking it in, still not worrying about the texture. I just want to get the lights and darks marked in on all of these raspberries, and then that will give me something to build upon as we go. So now that I've got something down for all of the fruit, what I now want to do is actually switch over to some of the darkest colours. So usually I would work from the lightest colours towards the darkest colours and then generally back to the lightest, but it's so hard to work out what needs to go where when you're dealing with such a bright background. So I think it works a lot better to fill in those lightest colours on each of the pieces of fruit and then switch to some really quite dark browns. That is the bulk of what the bowl is looking like, to fill in all around the background, and then it should be a bit easier for us to kind of get our bearings on what needs to go where. So I can work my way around the pieces of fruit. I generally speaking like to start from the left hand side and work towards the right. Find it easiest to work in quite a methodical way. I want to work around the patch of light around the edge of the bowl, and I generally speaking want to try and get this down in as smooth a way as possible, because around the edge of the bowl it's just such a solid block of colour. I don't want it to be looking really scribbly. So you'll see that I'm working in little circular motions to try and get the pencil down in as smooth a way as possible. Now whilst I'm working my way around here and filling in the darkest areas, what I also want to do is add in any darker details, begin mapping those in. So the seeds on the kiwi is a really good example of this. By looking really closely at the reference photo and trying to get these mapped in pretty accurately, it's just going to make my life so much easier as I work through the midtones that we'll have to do in a second. So I can work through here one kiwi at a time. They are the fruit with the most detail, I would say. And I'm just really looking at the kind of the direction that these seeds are pointing in, getting them mapped in. It is going to be a little bit lost when we add some of the lighter colors over the top. It's not going to look as vibrant, so we can adjust this all towards the end. And then I can keep working my way around the bowl. Again, looking at the blueberries, for example, there's some pretty dark shadows on these blueberries. So let's get those marked in. And you can see that quite quickly, we're getting something that looks a bit more like a bowl of fruit. Now it does still look very grainy. There's a lot of the orange paper still showing through, but that's fine. The important thing is that it's really obvious, as I say, what needs to go where. And then we've got something that we can be working with. So now I've got the darkest colors mapped in. I think what's going to be easiest now is to start also mapping in any other areas of detail. So although this isn't one of the darkest colors, it's going to make my life so much easier to map in all of the texture on the raspberries now. And this is very much a case of looking at the raspberries and trying to replicate what I can see on here, using maybe the edge of the raspberry as a little bit of a guide. And I can't stress enough, I still don't expect it to look good at this point. What I can do from here is really start thinking about the midtones, and I really want to start perfecting one fruit at a time. So now that I've got everything mapped out, I can really see where everything needs to go. I'm going to focus on the kiwi to begin with. So I'm using a much darker green now to map in all of those darker areas, really looking at the shapes that make up this kiwi. And I can just work through one kiwi at a time, building up this little bit of extra contrast. And that's slowly starting to remove some of the orange that's showing through. From there, I want to use the same green that I used to begin with to much firmer go over the whole area. And now I want to be covering up all of that orange. Now, one thing that I have particularly noticed about this paper is that I'm not able to get a huge amount of different colors down. It just doesn't show up very well if you don't press hard. But if you do press hard, you're not able to get as many colors down. Now, it's not necessarily an issue. Even pressing really hard here, I will still be able to get some more color over the top, but it's just something to bear in mind. I think maybe it's a little bit harder to create the realistic look with the fewer colors. So once I built up all of that lighter green, let's use the white pencil to add in some of the lighter details, really brighten up what's here. And I think that that's working really well. It's really lightening this up. You can see that we're able to add in some quite nice details, particularly on this section of kiwi here. It's not super bold bright, but it is nice and kind of subtle. And then now I've added that in, I want to go back over the seeds nice and carefully, add in all of that detail with that very dark brown that we used a second ago. So where I've so heavily blended the kiwi, just all of these seeds are looking a little bit too muted. They look a little bit lost. So that is essentially the process I need to go through for each type of fruit, because they're all a different color. Before I move on from the kiwi though, let's add a little bit of brown just to give a little bit of extra depth in the shadows. And I think that that looks quite good. It looks pretty realistic. So let's do the same for the mango now. I can fill in the slightly more shadowed areas with the same brown. Really fill in those shadows, make it look a little bit more realistic. And then I can move on to the very bright yellow, pressing really nice and firmly to try and brighten up what's here. I think even pressing firmly with the bright yellow, even where I'm putting it on top of some white in some cases, it still just doesn't look as bright as it would on white paper. So again, it is just worth bearing that in mind. So let's go over all of this mango again with the white pencil to lighten any areas that further need brightening. I do think that this is a really important step and it's making a huge difference. And then I can go through exactly the same process for the blueberries. So I'm using a dark cool grey here to add in those shadows that aren't currently showing through. And then I can blend that with a slightly lighter cool grey just to smooth it out. It's all looking a little bit harsh before brightening these areas with the white once again. And you can see the same process on the raspberries, using a dark reddish brown to add in the shadows, but also add in all of that detail. I'm really just going over the top of the raspberries, adding in all of the spots exactly over the top of the red pencil that I added a second ago. And it's kind of giving me a bit of a guide so that I know that I'm putting this in the right place. So let's freshen up some of the white areas now. They're looking white. They're not maybe looking white enough. I really want them to pop. And then the most obvious difference right now between my reference photo and my drawing is that the background, all of the dark bowl areas are nowhere near dark enough. So let's really press quite firmly now. Once again, working from the top and working down towards the bottom. And I'm using this very dark brown. This is the darkest brown in my set. I've deliberately not used black because I think it can look quite harsh. And I want to really make that background as dark as possible so the fruit is really standing out. And I honestly think that this is what's bringing the whole thing together. Now, once I've gone over all of this with this very dark pencil, I could say that I'm done at this point. But actually, even though I've added so much white over the top of the coloured pencil to try and make it as light as possible, in some areas, I just still don't think that the fruit is popping enough. So I think what I want to do is add some more white in, but not more white pencil. Let's use what's called a jelly roll pen. This is a white gel pen that enables you to put a really bright white over the top of coloured pencils. It stands out in a much brighter way than a white pencil. So I can put this over any areas of the fruit where I think it could really benefit from an extra pop of white. So the odd area on the raspberries, for example, and on a few areas of the mango as well. And then the last thing I want to do once that pen has completely dried is just tone it down by putting a little bit of coloured pencil over the top. You can see putting this pink over the top is making it a little bit less bright white, but it is still really showing all of that extra brightness. So I do think it's possible to make some really good realistic art on even quite a bright coloured paper. But I do think it helps to go about it in maybe a slightly different way. Starting off by putting in those lightest colours, then switching to the darkest colours, and then focusing on one section at a time to really make it as vibrant as it should be. And then I do think that adding the jelly roll pen over the end just really helps give it that extra pop. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Do remember, if you would like to draw this with me, it is available on my Patreon. Happy drawing, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.